You can lighten it up. Good evening.
Good evening, folks. We'll make a start.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. No, there's one gentleman in the room, right? There's two counting Roger. Thank you for coming. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Bill Terra, and I'm the one who's going to be doing all the talking. This little statement, living as if life mattered, was actually my response to a question about a year ago. And I was doing a seminar in Europe, where I live, and somebody asked me a question, which is an oft-asked question, and that is, what is macrobiotics? And for the last 45 years, I've been asked that question hundreds and hundreds of times. Probably everybody who's macrobiotic has been asked that question hundreds and hundreds of times, and every person has given a different answer, most of which were correct, right? You know, it's one of those things that's very hard to define. And I just said, well, it's living as if life mattered. Right? And the person said, well, everybody thinks that life matters. And I said, really? I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. Because I don't know if there's any proof of that. I don't know if we look at what we as human beings do on this planet, that we can really say that we live as if life mattered. You know? And I'm not just talking about my life or your life. I'm talking about all life, right? As if life mattered. There was something that was important there. Roger, you're going to need to sit next to nearer the slide projector, because every once in a while I'm going to ask you to change the slide, like now. And so this issue of whether life matters or not is really an issue that is a big issue, and macrobiotics is about big issues. It's the part of macrobiotics which oftentimes gets left in the dust, because it gets approached as if it were a science, which it definitely is not. Right? Macrobiotics is about asking very big questions about what life is, about what we do in life, how we operate within life, all of those things. And so what I want to do this evening is I want to explore that idea with you a little bit. And I certainly encourage you to stop me anytime you want and ask questions, right? Because I like the dialogue. If you don't, I'll just talk for the next hour and a half or so, right? You know, because that's what I do, right? So, just so you know. So, some of you may be familiar with the cheese man. How many of you are familiar with the cheese man? Oh, okay, a couple of you. There's a little clip on YouTube that has me talking about the cheese man. And so, the cheese man. Roger, you got to be on the ball. The cheese man was a client of mine, right, many years ago, and it was a client that that really opened my eyes to something that I hadn't noticed before. And he came to me in really bad shape. Really bad. One of his desperation states. He had had heart surgery, had had a major heart attack, right? Almost checked out of the building, right? He had very, very high cholesterol, and his wife brought him along and said, you know, see if we can do something to fix him, right? And so I made up a plan for him, and I talked to him and talked to him and talked to him, and while I was doing something else, I handed the dietary advice to him. And he was looking at it, and I turned around and I looked at him, and he had this very defiant look on his face. And I said, is there anything wrong? And he said, this says I can't have cheese. And I said, well, no, you want to lower your cholesterol, and so at least for a while, you need to do without the cheese, right? That's the only way you're going to get the cholesterol down is by not taking it in, right? And he folded it up and he said, I'd rather die than not have cheese, right? And that's where you hit the slide the second time, right? And that actually appears on the screen magically, right? Rather die than give up cheese. And that was a very shocking thing. In fact, I laughed. I thought he was joking. And I laughed, which didn't go over well with him, right? You know, because he thought I was laughing at him, which in fact I was, you know, but I thought I was laughing at him with him, right, for a while, but then it turned out I wasn't laughing at him with him, I was just laughing at him, right? Because the whole equation of life and cheese seemed to me like a no-brainer, right? You know, there's life and there's cheese, and which one do you choose? I don't know. I go for the cheese. Right? You know, but the second part of that is that we all have our cheese. You know, we all do have our cheese. You know, we have that thing or those things that we want so badly that we're willing to trade our life for it. And we don't identify that. We just say, well, yes, that's a little thing that's here and that, you know, and it's not really important. I mean, I had a conversation with a man at a social event about a week ago. It was a big party, and there were lots of people there, and this guy cornered me and started, I hear you do stuff about food, and I would say, yeah, I do, but, you know, I'm at a party, and no, I want to talk to you about my prostate. Which is always fun, right? You know, this guy's got a prostate the size of a baseball, right? You know, and he's up peeing all night, and he's got all of these problems. But he said, "Can you help me with this?" And I said, "Well, you know, if you want, I could send you a program." I said, "I'll give you my email address." And he said, "But you're not going to give me that diet, are you?" And I said, "Well, that's a place to start, right?" No, I don't want to do that. I thought, oh, well, that's okay, waddle off, right? You know, because, you know, happy sailing tonight. No, this is trading life for something as simple as just how simple is it to change food? We act like babies in front of this. It's just eat a different food. It's not a big deal, is it? It is, though, because we like our cheese, right? No, we got, you know, we got those attachments to things that don't serve our purpose. Now, all of that, because it's not just the food cheese, it's the whole cheese, right? And nothing but the cheese. It's the whole thing. And a part of this has to do with a way of being, right? More literally, a way of not being, right? And that way of not being was characterized by one of my favorite psychologists, Erich Fromm, who said that there is a pathology that dominates modern society based on the accumulation of goods. It's an identification of self-worth with objects. We have to make a choice between having or being. Right?
Well said.
Having or being. Now, interesting that he used the word pathology. Yeah. He really understood that this is a sickness of the soul. Right? A sickness of the soul which creates an anxiety within us. Right? How do I fill my time? How do I go about doing things? I got to have more stuff. I got to bring more things into my life. And so we spend all of our time accumulating. We don't only accumulate in terms of material goods, but we accumulate in terms of the way that we feel about the world. Right? We have a very kind of insular way of being. We take in ideas and we own them, right? And then they're ours, and we're rigid. We won't change them, right? There are ideas. So we do this with ideas. We do it with everything. In fact, one of the primary issues, which has been most eloquently explored by George Carlin, right? Some of you may have seen George Carlin do his thing about stuff. Right? It's very telling because it is about stuff. And part of that stuff is the representation of different kinds of ideas, and those ideas oftentimes have to do with health and well-being. Right? How many of you go on the internet and look at nutritional sites? Have you ever just done this for amusement or education? Right? Okay, because the amusement part is much better, right, than the education part. The interesting thing is that nutrition now has become one of those things where people like vigorously defend positions which are almost indefensible. Right? I mean, they don't stand the light of day. And yet, people will defend them to the death. Right? Defend them to the death. Go on Dr. McCullough's site. Right? You want to see some action, get in there with Dr. Macola. He'll kick you around a little bit. He's a total nut, right? You know, I mean, he's got some nice stuff on his side, but very little of it comes through him, right? You know, he just pulls stuff up because he's selling pills, right? You know, but this is part of the stuff. It's part of the getting. We always want to get something external to take in, right? It's the way we approach medication. So the way we approach medication, we've mutated now into the way that we approach health, even so-called alternative health care. We want to reduce it down. Roger and I were talking about this today. We want to reduce down in a pill. We don't want to go down to the herbalist, and Roger was telling the story. People don't want to go to the herbalist, buy the herb, take it home, cook it up, and make a soup or stew. What they want to do is, can you give me this in a pill, right? Because again, in a pill, right, then it's right there and it's easy. I can just, I can get it, and then it becomes part of my stuff, right? Part of the stuff of my life, right? Now, there's an interesting relationship, I think, here, which I want to talk about Maslow for a minute, another psychologist, who I think did incredible work. And then we get to George Ozawa, because both of them saw something very similar. And it may have to do with this whole thing about life and making life matter. Are any of you familiar with Maslow? Okay. So, you know then, this is the Walt Disney version of Maslow, right? Okay. But basically, what Maslow is saying is we have certain primary needs, and we have to fulfill those primary needs. And if those primary needs are not met, what happens is we feel an emptiness around that need. Now, some of them are very obvious. We have to have food, water, air, sleep, and sex, right? Some people think the sex is optional, but you know, it's not probably, right? You know, it's there. Food, water, air, and sex. And then we have to have safety, right? This is a biggie, right? Safety, because we're starting to see right now a situation where in the world a lot of people are feeling unsafe. Dangerous things happen when people feel unsafe, right? They feel unsafe about their employment, about their property. They feel unsafe about their health, their family, their resources, right? When these things are there, and particularly when we live in an illusion society, right? An illusion society means that we are surrounded by aspirations. Right? You know, if you, as Roger will tell you, I watch an immense amount of television when I come to America, right? Which is not often, and I find it fascinating. Right? British television is very different from American television in certain ways. But in American television, there is this assumption that everybody lives a certain way. Even in a McDonald's commercial, everybody looks healthy. Did you ever notice that? Right? And not only healthy, but there's a nice racial mix. You know, there's a middle-class couple having a birthday party, you know, and then there's some black people there, and there's some Oriental people there, there's some Mexican people, Latino people there. There's all these different people there, and they all look happy, and they all look healthy. And they're all eating McDonald's, right? You know, it's an aspiration. It could be that way, right? It's like an American dream, right? It's a dream come true, right? Everybody's healthy and happy, and they're having their cheese as well, right? So we get to have everything. We get to have the health, the happiness, the cheese, the whole package together. Well, what's happening is that when we live in that illusion of that down here, because health, safety of health, comes in big time here. And that's where Ozawa saw the big difference, right? Because you cannot aspire up to that pinnacle of joy, creativity, self-esteem, and acknowledgement if you're trapped down at a lower level, right? And George Ozawa, who put together the ideas initially about macrobiotics, saw that that little piece was something that was very important in solving the puzzle. It was an important insight. It wasn't the whole thing, but it was an important insight. And that was that we are built from the bottom up. Right? Now, some people may balk at that for some ideological purpose, but put it aside for a moment, right? We're built from the bottom up, and you can't prove differently, right? If you're not there, you can't experience what's there, right? You know, you have to have a body. You have to have a brain. You have to have your sensory organs. You have to be there, right? And that starts at a very early age with the way that we are nourished. It's one of the primary influences on our whole life. And the way that we are nourished, not only physically but also emotionally, that which we take in colors the way that we experience the world. Now, we all know that, right? You know that you grow up in a certain culture, you grow up in a certain family, you're nourished in a certain way physically, you're nourished in a certain way emotionally, intellectually. You have all of these forces that come into you, and these create who you are, right? Now, you could put other influences up there too. You could put all the astrology and everything else that you wanted to. You can fill the whole thing with different kinds of influences. But from a very early age, we start to gather those influences in, and that molds who we are. And it also gives us the information as to whether we are capable of changing that or not. Are you capable of changing who you are? Right? Because if that gets built in early that you can't, that it's all a big mistake, or that it's all genetics, right? Then you're really trapped, right? You're really trapped. Have you noticed how sexy genetics is to people? You know, there's a few illnesses that this is not true of, okay? And so I know that. But if you take something like obesity is a good one. Obesity now is a big problem, one of the biggest health problems in the whole world, all over the world. This is a very democratic problem, right? It doesn't stop at the borders of the Western industrialized world like a lot of other diseases have. This is all over Asia now, it's all over Africa now, it's in South America, obesity. And obesity is a really good way to track the future of many degenerative processes. Diabetes, certain types of cancer, heart disease, stroke. Obesity is a predictor of those. If you know the obesity rate, you can just project that right out. Right? So last year there was some doctor, right? Of course, it's a doctor. Right? Doctor makes it interesting, more interesting when it's a doctor. I've actually considered buying a white coat. Right? You know, and or some of those scrubs, you know. I want those scrubs like Dr. Oz wears, right? You know, a green scrub, like I'm going to go and have an operation in a moment. Then when you say something, people go, oh my God, a doctor said that, right? So a doctor came out with this report and it said that obesity was influenced greatly by genetics. And I'm thinking, well, there's an idea that'll really float, right? You know, because everybody can say, see, it's my parents. It's my parents, it's a problem. The only problem is, if you go back and you look at photographs from the 1930s and the 1940s, you wonder, where's the obese people? Right? Where's that bloody gene hiding? It's sneaking around somewhere. It's not showing up, right? It's recumbent. Right? It's just laying in the background somewhere, waiting for the 2000 to come, right? 2012, and then the end of the world. Everybody explodes, right? No, right? That's probably the deal. Right? So everybody this was on the front page of every paper in the United Kingdom. Everyone on the front page, right? And everybody's going, oh my God, it's genetic, right? It's putting its head up in Scotland now, big time, right? Because they have such a huge problem with obesity that it doesn't even. It beggars the imagination, the problem in Scotland. Scotland is one of the unhealthiest places in the world. And I live right in the middle of it. It is. The county that I live in, Lanarkshire, has worse health than Yugoslavia. Right?
And why is that?
Huh?
Why?
Because my wife is Scottish. Right? Right. That's the reason we ended up there, right? We ended up there, and then all of a sudden, interesting work started showing up, right? So maybe that's why they're, I don't know. Right?
And why are they so unhealthy? I mean, the diet?
The diet, the smoking, the drinking. Right? Any conversation you have in Scotland always begins with, "Let's go have a drink." Right? You know, I'd like to meet you, and maybe we do this thing together. I'd like to meet you. You have an apartment to rent. Great, let's go have a drink. Right? Everybody wants to go have a drink first, and then you can have a conversation. You only have a conversation if you've had a drink, right? So drink is really big, and the diet is absolutely atrocious. Scotland was one of the last places that really caught up with modern Britain, right? Particularly Glasgow. Right? And Glasgow was filled with tenement housing for people that used to work in the factories there. And these were really like 1930s tenements that made it through. See, the South got bombed a lot, and so they rebuilt things. Glasgow never got bombed. It was too far for the Germans to get, right? And so it had all of these tenements. Most of them had no central heating. It's very cold and very damp, and so people ate a very fat-rich diet to stay warm. One of the favorite sandwiches up there was lard between two pieces of bread. Right? Right? You know, that was what a lot of people lived on. Right? Well, and if you're in that climate and you're not getting much nutrition, that caloric density helps out. Right? You know, it keeps you warm for a while. And so, but then now they started to modernize everything. You know, so it's a deep frying center of the universe. Right? You know, you can get deep fried pizza in Glasgow. You can get deep fried Mars bars in the marketplaces, right? Now there's something. Who can do this? Show me a tempura cook that can do that one. Right? So it's a very, very unhealthy place. But the whole thing with diabetes and the genetics and different kinds of cancer and genetics. Now, some of you may have different information, but from the research that I've done, I've never seen any kind of cancer that had higher than a 6% tendency, right, toward having that kind of cancer in family history. But yet, people will tell you, I hear all the time, clients will tell me, well, I think this is genetic, right? And I'll say, why? Did your mother, your father, your grandfather? No, but it's genetic, right? Yes. It's genetic, right? Because we love that thing when we can distance ourselves from the problem. Right? If it's not our problem, we can have our cheese and we can feel okay about it, right? Because there's nothing we can do about it. It was the will of God. Right? The moving finger of fate. That was it. Right? You know? That was it. Okay. So this effect ripples through, and as it goes through the development of our consciousness, as the kind of thinking that separates us off from the processes of life ripples out into our consciousness, it has a tendency to disguise itself as something that it's not. And this is something that Ozawa saw very clearly. He said, if you don't have healthy emotional development, what will happen is that you'll come up with certain concepts and certain social ideas that actually don't have anything to do with society at all. They have everything to do with emotion. They're just disguised. Right? You can come up with an ideology which is based on emotion, right? Or which is based on sensory pleasure. Right? You know, I was telling somebody earlier, you know, I was at this was the party that I was at where I met the man with the prostate, right? Well, of course, many men have prostates, but this prostate was out of hand, right? This was a 3-day extravaganza birthday party for very, very wealthy people, right? And so in there, you hear a lot of opinions about what happens in society. But so much of it, with this particular group, particularly a small group out of that group, everything in their life was based on sensory pleasure. They wanted to drink the best wine. They wanted to eat the most expensive cuts of meat. They wanted to, you know, everything they wanted to do was to feel, you know. And these were people who were self-made millionaires, multi-millionaires. But all of them started out poor. And so their development was that the best way to fulfill their life was to really have the best of everything, everything that tastes good, everything that looks good, you know, the whole deal. Right? You know. They built a whole ideology around it. Right? They will only support politicians, for instance, who think that that's admirable. Right? But it doesn't have anything to do with ideology. It doesn't have anything to do with social or conceptual judgment or thinking about the other people within society. All it is an infantile need to be satisfied that was never fulfilled. Right? And so it just ripples right out. Look, we do the same kind of thing with food, which we'll get to in just a minute. If we don't fulfill ourselves, there is an emptiness. Right? And so we have to have that fulfillment, because otherwise we look for other things to fill up the emptiness with. Okay? Roger. So there are a few things here, a few things that come out of poor judgment in terms of our society. One of them that's an important one to me is our relationship with nature. Right? You find, when you look back historically, that people got great sustenance out of their exposure to nature. Right? You know, you go into nature and you feel where you came from, right? You know, I was very fortunate. I grew up in Northern California, and we lived very near the ocean. And when I was going through all my teenage dramas, every time I was upset, what I did was I went down to the ocean, right? You know, and I would sit on the rocks and I would watch the waves come in and out, and you know, usually half an hour or so, 40, I'd get over my sniff, and you know, that would be it. I'd feel refreshed. I could go back into battle again. Right? But it was that relationship with something that is bigger than ourselves. Something that's bigger than ourselves and that we come out of, because those kind of things have a resonance within us. You know, our brain works differently in nature than it does in the city. Right? Works differently. Right? Sounds, taste, smells, everything resonates differently in our brain and our whole body when we're exposed to our origin, right? Where we come from. Right? And we don't get enough of that. And in fact, we have built a whole cultural relationship with nature which has to do with domination of nature, haven't we? Right? It's all about how we can dominate, how we can control. You know? I used to do quite a bit of work in Switzerland, and one of the things I always thought was amusing in Switzerland is the Swiss, who are very ordered people, and they really are, right? They organize everything. They've managed in some places to take the bends out of rivers, right? To make the river go straight, because as much, you know, I mean, let's face it, you know, rivers have a tendency to meander, right? You know, and then they go over this way, and then they go this way, and then they go down, and they go. The Swiss says, no, 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 no. They make the river straight, and they did, right? Right from the there's a place where the famous death of Sherlock Holmes happened at the Kiental Waterfalls, right? The Reichenbach Falls, right? And the river that comes out of the Reichenbach Falls is a very beautiful, very fast, very cold river. And they've just straightened it right out so it gets lickety-split down to the next town. It doesn't fool around. They get it right down there, right? So this is just an attitude that we have about nature, and that bubbles over into so many parts of our life, right? You know, what about the fact that, what if we accept the fact that all existence is an accident? There's one that really screwed with our heads, right? Didn't it? Good old Darwin. A bad interpretation of Darwin, right? But still, an interpretation is very popular, and that is, you know, is there any purpose to life? Pfft, forget it, right? Two molecules together in space, bang, you know, life, that's it, right? You know, it comes and it goes, right? Well, what does that do to us internally in the way that we think about life and being in the world, right? Because that's about life, right? What do we do? You know, we take another example out of what I think is a misinterpretation of Darwin again, and that is the survival of the fittest. Right? That's a dandy one. Right? No, so you are best, you are more evolved if you're more ruthless, right? Which is not what Darwin said at all. He said actually most adaptable, right? Survival of the most adaptable, right? But by the time social Darwinists got a hold of that, it became, you know, the survival of the fittest, you know, bloody in tooth and claw, and that's the way that you get to the top. And so you have a whole strain of capitalistic thinking that is based on that premise. I've been told I shouldn't mention politicians by name, but you know, listen to Romney speak, right? Right? I mean, that's in his brain, right? In his brain, right? The strong survive by accumulation. Whoa, accumulation, right? You go ahead and you push out there and you push them down and you get ahead and you make a lot of money, and that's the American way. Well, if that's the American way, we're in big trouble.
What do you think of Obama?
I'm sad.
Yeah, he's good.
But I'm sad about Obama. You asked me how I felt about him, right? I feel sad about him, right? I don't know. What do you think I am? I think well, I don't know. I don't even know who he's running against.
Nobody knows.
But I'd feel sad anyway, right? I feel sad because I don't think that he's fulfilled his own promise, right? No, that's why I feel sad. But I'm optimistic, right? We'll see. Right? Okay. So, our relationship to each other. You know, what does that do to our relationship to each other? What are the cultural myths about us and the way we relate to each other? Right? What are those relationships about? Right? Is there a purpose to those relationships? You know, one of the things that upset Europeans most when they landed on these shores were the way that the native people treated each other. No, because most native people in North America didn't have property. Property, they thought, was what a silly concept that is. There's just stuff and you pass it around. You know? In fact, the people that really messed with the Europeans' heads were the native people that lived in the Pacific Northwest, who every year used to take all of their belongings, put them in a big pile, and then people could take what they wanted. Right? You know, the potlatch. Right? You know, a fantastic thing. What a great thing. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Everybody just takes their stuff out and just takes Central Park and everybody put it out there, you know, and people just get to take other stuff and they think, God, I'm glad you put that in there this year because I've been looking at it for a long time and I really want it, right? For the next year, right? Because I got to put it back again, right? You know, that really messed with the European mind. Okay? Because there was no accumulation there. If you want to read a beautiful book, there's a book called The Gift. Right? Can't remember the author's name. It might come to me in the next minutes or so. But a Canadian author, no, American author, right? The Gift, right? It's the only one you'll find. It's all about the tradition of giving gifts to other people in society and how that, for many primitive societies, that was the basis of the whole society. That you are there, that if you're part of my tribe, what I do is I give to you, right? Unreservedly. If you need something, I give it, right? And just imagine if people were doing that. If everybody's giving all the time, right? Everybody's got it. Right? There's nobody that hasn't got it. And if you were the chief or the chiefess, right? What you did was people just came up and gave you stuff all the time because you gave everything away all the time. You didn't hang on to anything unless it was some sort of a symbolic tribal object, you know, like a prayer bead or a prayer pipe or something like that, or something that had historical significance. You kept that for the tribe, right? To pass on. Everything else, give the chief horses, gives them away immediately, right? Right? Thanks very much for the gift. I appreciate it. Give it away to the people who don't have horses, right? Fantastic. Obama should try that, right? He wouldn't get reelected, though. So all of these different kinds of ideas that permeate out of this culture of need, constant need, right? They create an interesting thing about us, and one of the interesting things that they create about it has to do with science, and it has to do with medicine, and it has to do with nutrition, right? You know, there's another slide that's supposed to be in there, and so no, but it probably didn't make it. It didn't make it in, right? And so I'll just talk about it, even though it's not there. And that was that we, in Americans, we have a unique part to play in this, because in the history of food, we changed food more in the shortest period of time more than any other culture has ever done it. We changed food. Right? And some of you in the room probably remember this, right? And remember it well, because it was those of us that were born during World War II, or right at the cusp of the end of it, were the ones that saw it the most. And it had to do with a number of different things. One of them had to do with, wars always produce some very interesting phenomena. And World War II, one of the things that World War II produced was a whole different attitude about food. And it had to do with the fact that you had armies that were further away from the source of their food than had ever occurred in history. Right? So you had American armies that were in the Orient, and you had American armies that were in Europe, and all these people had to be fed. And so it's very difficult. There's some logistic problems there, and that is, how do you get food to these people which they can actually eat, right, and survive on, right, and make it somewhat palatable, right? And so what happened was a huge increase in food chemistry came about, right? How do you make K rations and C rations? The K rations and C rations were the foods that troops took with them, right? You could put it in your backpack. You could take a little package of stuff and you could mix it with water and heat it up in a tiny little pot, and it would come out smelling like stew. There would even be little chunks in there which were vaguely identifiable as potatoes or carrots, right? Even if they weren't, right? They were identifiable as such, but it smelled like it had beef in it, even if it didn't, right? No, so there's lots of little tricks that they learned how to play. Well, when the war was over, there was this huge industry about tricking people about food that was in place. Now, this industry didn't go away. They said, you know, I mean, this is really cost effective. We can take just about anything and we can make it look, taste, and smell different, right? We can put a different mouth to it. We can change the whole structure of this. This is exciting. And this was the beginning of a huge experiment, a huge food experiment that was done here in America. God bless America, from shore to shining shore, right? And this is where we did it, right? And they tried it out in the market. They had to test it here and there. They tested it out with TV dinners and convenience foods. I remember my first TV dinner, right? Some of you may remember the Swanson's TV dinner, right? It's a pinnacle. The Swanson's TV dinner. A piece of rubbery meat and some mashed potatoes and a little vegetable, and all you had to do was stick it in the oven, right? In the oven, and like magic, take it out, peel back the aluminum foil, and then put it on a TV tray, right? And you could sit and watch television and eat at the same time. My God, the heavens opened up. All the housewives in the aprons that were doing all those Westinghouse commercials, right? They were free at last. Oh my God, free at last, right? They didn't have to cook anymore, right? Of course, they tasted terrible, and so they didn't really take off, right? Only the ultra lazy went for them, right? And the ultra lazy went for the TV dinner, but most other people went, no, you got to work on this a little more, right? You got to work on this a little more. So those kind of meals didn't really hit until the microwave oven came in, right? The microwave oven became easier to create that kind of food, you know, and then you could do it faster, fantastic. But convenience foods, so everything in a can, right? Because women started working during the World War II, and at the end of World War II, women didn't want to stop working. They didn't, you know. They thought, well, you know, this was okay. I was out doing a job, you know, and I was making money, making my own money, and doing all that. And so it's a new household. It's a new America, and it has to be fed. Teenagers, the first teenagers, right? The first independent teenagers with money, right? 1950s. 1951, two guys in Southern California, two brothers, discovered, using the principles of Henry Ford, discovered how to chank out hamburgers faster than anybody had ever made them before, the McDonald brothers, right? In the very same year, a colonel from Kentucky, right, started a franchise in Utah. Colonel Sanders, Kentucky Fried Chicken with a secret recipe, right? Okay. This was it, right? People were thinking, we don't have to cook anymore. We don't have to make food. Just we got a whole industry out here that makes food for us. And that industry was experimenting on ways to do what? To make more money off of food than had ever been imagined in the history of humanity. Because it was all about money. It wasn't about nutrition. About nutrition. The only way nutrition intruded in this was trying to convince people, and this happened a little earlier than that really, but try to convince people there were foods that they weren't using enough of, but they were cheap to produce. So find out a way to convince people to eat this food, right? Why should you drink milk? the consumer asked. Why should I drink milk? When I was a child, which was in the Depression, not me personally, but people thinking, my imaginary person here, right, is thinking, in the 1930s, we didn't drink milk when we were adults. We only drank it when we were babies, right? You shouldn't drink milk? They said, yeah, but if you don't drink milk, your bones will fall apart. Right? And if you don't feed milk to your children's bones will fall apart, right? Yeah, well, my God, you don't want that to happen, right?
But they stopped mothers from breastfeeding.
Yeah, and that's another way to sell the milk, right? Okay. So this is, you know, the Nestle's Corporation, the Carnation Corporation. These organizations went out and convinced people that they had to have milk. Milk was absolutely, positively part of a healthy diet. And why? Because Americans were strong. And why do we know that? Because they just won a big war, right? We were strong people, healthy people. When MacArthur took over as the governor of Japan, the first thing he did was made it a law that Japanese children had to have a pint of milk every day. Because he said, these people are too small, right? They need to be bigger. And so he made a law that they should have a pint of milk, right? So they could get some long bone growth, right? What's going on here? Why eat oranges? Oranges were a treat. Up until the 1940s, oranges were a big treat for people, right? How come we would eat an orange, right? Well, because you don't have vitamin C. What's vitamin C? It's something, don't ask questions, right? It's something you need, right? Vitamin C. Because you won't get scurvy, right? Well, of course, there was no scurvy in America, right? There never was scurvy in America, except the ultra poor in the 1800s in New York, actually, right? When people just didn't have any food at all, right? Okay? So, sell them that. Why should we eat more meat? Because people weren't eating a lot of meat then. They were eating it and they liked it, obviously, right? They were eating it and they liked it. Why should they eat more meat? Because you have to have meat to have protein. You have to have protein, right? Now, what is protein? What is vitamin C? What is calcium? The people who are being convinced of this have no idea at all. But it's the white coat, right? When the white coat says these things, you believe it. Now, what is that called when we see this among primitive people?
Hypnosis.
We call it superstition, actually, right? We say superstition. This person has no basis for belief. They've never seen a vitamin C. Never seen one. Have you? I never saw a vitamin C, right? Never saw a calcium. Never saw a calcium. Never saw a protein, right? I don't know. Now, I'm not suggesting that they don't exist, right? I'm just saying people were convinced of that not because of education. They were convinced of that to make sales of food, right? That was the motivation. So the motivation of the modern food industry was to do that. This is the first generation that grew up on chemically sprayed food.
But it's not, it wasn't the doctor's conscious intention to get, they're taught it in schools, so they think, oh, I'm doing the right thing, and ethically they think they're doing
Well, actually, doctors aren't taught nutrition at all.
right.
Doctors are totally ignorant about nutrition, right? Medical school, nutrition, departments of nutrition, if you go, and this is changing, but up until very, very recently, if you go to any department of nutrition and you read their prospectus, what you'll notice is that they're mostly sponsored by food companies. The Harvard School of Nutrition, if you go to the Harvard School of Nutrition, behind the shrubs, right, along the foundation block, you'll see these brass plaques. It says, kind donation of Kellogg's Corporation, kind donation of Continental Can, kind donation, blah, 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 blah. That's, and where do nutritionists like to work? No. Are you kidding? Nutritionists want to work in hospitals? That's the lowest level. That's the junk job for nutritionists. Nutritionists want to work for food companies. They want to work for food. That's where the money is. It's in food companies. They work for a food company. You get to do all the really sexy stuff. You get the big laboratories, right? And then you have to figure out why people should eat chocolate, right? Challenging things like that, because it has a magical ingredient that if you ate 25 bars a day might prevent some kind of cancer. And that's the kind of research that mostly gets done there. So food additives, Food additives now working down onto the smallest possible level. Right? How you can flavor. Go into any grocery store. How many flavors of potato chips are there? I don't know if it's in this country too, because I don't. But beef flavored potato chips. In England, they have beef flavored potato, ham flavored potato chips. Right?
It's like that magic pill.
It's like a beef flavored potato chip. Now there's something to write home about, right? And you know a beef never came anywhere near it. Right? There's no beef in there at all, right? There wasn't a cow near that potato chip ever, 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 right? But it's a beef flavored potato chip. I took I should have put that slide that slide in. I have a slide that I made of a label on a food product that I bought in the UK, which was a diet product, and there were 40 ingredients on it. And the only ingredients that were actually identifiable as foods were turmeric, turmeric, salt, right? And milk solids, right? And what was the other one? Oh, yeah, it was some other dairy solid, right? 40 ingredients, right? All chemicals, right? And it was called, because I used to put the slide up and I say, tell people, what do you think this is, right? Because you can't figure out what is it? It's chicken flavored soup. Now there's no chicken at all. No chicken in there at all, but chicken flavored soup, right? And so this is the kind of food that was created out of that big cultural shift that happened immediately after World War II. The use of hormones so that we could grow animals faster. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to go to Puerto Rico as part of a project. It was actually about 15 years ago now. But one of the villages that we went to was a village where the girls were menstruating at about 9, 10 years old, and all the little boys had breasts. Big chicken farm where they all worked. Right? Chicken farm at the top of the hill, village at the bottom of the hill. Right? The chickens that were too sick to actually be sold to make chicken bits out of, and that means they're really sick, right? Those chickens got sold cheap to the people who worked in the factory, but the waste from the chicken factory went down into the groundwater and was in the well water. And so you have a whole village of children that were damaged because of the intense amount of female growth hormones that were being fed to those chickens. Right? So now we all get a chance to do this. You know? Everybody can do this now. Right? We can all get our dosage of hormones, and it's all female hormones too, right? Okay. Which, who knows what the repercussions of that are in reality, right? That's like predicting who'll win the next election, right? No. Right? No, we just don't know. Is it good, bad, or indifferent? Well, we got to imagine that it's bad, right? We're not supposed to be doing that. Right? Okay. So this is a huge experiment, and that experiment is like bubbling out all over the world, right? And why? And what's it producing on the other end? Well, one of the reasons why there is so much obesity in the world right now is that people are malnourished. When you're eating lots, but you're not getting what you need, you're not getting the sustenance that you need, you want more, right? Bad food, particularly the food that is created, the fast food industry is creating, that food produces the need for more, and it's even worse than that. It's designed to make you want to eat more. Specifically designed. What food scientists know, those very same food scientists, those very same nutritionists, what they know is there's certain tastes, if you combine them, make people want to eat more. Salt and fat is a goodie. Everybody knows about that. You take something fatty and you salt it up, you can't stop eating it, right? We're wired because that was a combination that we didn't have much in the past. So we're wired to really